Hey, y'all, I'm Bud Elliott, and this is my college football summer school series on Cover 3. I bring on the team experts from the 24/7 sports staff and ask them the questions I care about. No fluff. Which players will be toughest to replace? What position groups are sneakily better or worse than I realize? We get you the scoop on each team in 20 minutes or less. Let's go. All right, guys, welcome back in. I'm Bud Elliott. This is Summer School on the Cover 3 podcast. Today, we're going to talk Stanford, a program that has had some major changes. And to help us do that, we're going to bring in Jackson Moore of Cardinal 247. Jackson, welcome to the show again, man.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So last year, a 3-9 record, not really a competitive team in many of those ball games. I think a lot of people had a whole lot of respect for David Shaw, and some teams probably didn't pour it on quite as well as or quite as much as they perhaps could have. At the end of some of those ball games, David Shaw steps down. They bring in Troy Taylor from Sacramento State. What are some of the biggest changes you've seen within the program so far? What's sort of the vibe and the feeling you get out of there right now?
Yeah, the biggest change, at least from watching practice, you see a different type of energy. It's a lot of up tempo. It's, stylistically quite polar opposite from the pro style kind of smash mouth football that Stanford had been used to running for a while. Now they've tried to change things up the last couple of years and weren't too successful, but kind of started trending towards this way in this modern era. From a coaching standpoint, I mean, as you mentioned, David Shaw had a lot of respect, both from opponents and from his school and the program and everything within. So he didn't think it was, I just didn't think it could be a culture issue. But from the very start, Coach Taylor has come out and preached that he wants to start with the base of love. And you hear him say that word a whole lot. It's about having that connection with the players and having them involved in everything. So it feels very much like they're starting from ground one with this change, and it's both from the coaching staff, which is 100% new, to the roster, even where the whole starting lineup, it seems like from last year, is either gone to the NFL or transferred out. A lot of those grad transfers too. So they don't want to call it a rebuild per se, since Stanford has had so much success in the not too distant past, but it feels like a brand new era for Stanford football for sure.
On offense, you mentioned probably increased pace, a little more spready, I would say. Who is going to play quarterback? Because they did lose Tanner McKee, who at least a couple NFL teams liked.
Yeah. I mean, that was a competition in the spring, and it's been unresolved. In fact, it's probably more complicated now that they've brought in another transfer. But all spring long, we saw Ari Patu and Ashton Daniels, who we've seen them play a little bit in the past. Patu had a start. Daniels was a Wildcat quarterback last year. So they went at it all spring long. Didn't really get a good grasp of either one really having the edge on the other. Just one day to the next, they traded first and second team reps. And now they bring in another quarterback out of Syracuse, the guy that probably has the same kind of resume. I mean, a guy that hasn't really played a whole lot, but the high 3-star kind of background and not a lot of college experience. So they're going to go into the season really with no one that has much experience under their belt at the college level, but that's a guy that could develop over 2 and 3 years and be a guy that turns into something for Troy Taylor. And it's kind of the way it's got to go at Stanford right now with the portal issues.
Speaking of those portal issues, I mean, the Stanford roster is not far off from what I guess Dion inherited at Colorado. The difference being there may not be 70 players in the entire portal that could get into Stanford, given how tight the admission requirements are. How much has this been a struggle for them at the offensive line, where 6 of their top 8 guys by snap count last year are gone? This, to me, this looks a little bit scary.
Yeah, absolutely. They 2 of their 4 transfers that they have gotten in via scholarship are offensive linemen, so they at least went after that as hard as they could. They got 2 Ivy Leaguers. Trevor Mayberry from Penn came in early for the spring. He's an undersized tackle, not experienced at guard, so even his situation has been a little tough for them. And they've got Alec Bank coming in from Harvard still. So Yeah, a lot of youth, not much experience on the O-line and not much depth either. They had trouble fielding two deeps in a lot of spring practices. So that O-line, especially considering it's often been the strength of Stanford's offense, is troublesome. But maybe going spread, going up tempo, getting the ball out a little bit quicker might take some of the pressure off of these guys that have had to either be smash mouth linemen or slow mesh last year, and uh, where the offense kind of broke down from the start over the past couple of years.
You do lose Elijah Higgins out wide. What's the prospect for this receiver room this year?
Yeah, that's a room where there are a couple of guys at least, but they lose about four or five of the main stars. Colby Bowman is one that returns. They've got a lot of youth. Mudia Rubin is a player who contributed as a true freshman last year, poised to be one of the contributors at a much higher level this year. Even Tiger Bachmeyer, an early enrollee true freshman, came in this spring and saw some first team reps at times. I think while Troy Taylor didn't run a very tight end heavy offense at Sac State, it is going to be a spot where they're going to use the best personnel they have. And this team includes a lot of receiving tight ends as well. So they're going to find a way to work those guys in for sure. And probably be some glorified slot receivers at times. Ben Urasek is about the best player on this team, perhaps. So he will definitely factor into that wide receiver conversation.
Makes sense. This offense is not as good as last year's, I assume, just in your estimation.
It's one of those things where probably across the board, this team's not nearly as talented as last year, but that team did win 3 games and the coaching was questioned for multiple years. So
Yeah.
you wonder if this new offensive coaching staff can take players that aren't as talented and potentially win a couple of more games, fingers crossed. But they have some weapons. I think the biggest thing the offense has going for them is that running backs, EJ Smith and Casey Filkins, are two very dynamic players that are going to be in a very dynamic offense for running backs. And we just haven't seen those guys have a full season healthy. Smith only lasted a couple of games last year, and Filkins has been banged up his whole career. So the fact that they have those two guys to lean on, and both are guys that are going to be catching passes out of the backfield, can split out to the slot, are terrific running backs themselves. That may be something that, Stanford last year, about the last month of the season, had no scholarship for running backs healthy. They were using a safety the last couple of games. So that's one area where this team should be a lot better personnel wise. One of the few spots you can probably point to at the roster and say that.
Makes sense. Defensively, they were pretty horrendous last year, and not just kind of not competitive in some of these ball games. And they did find a way to win 3 at least. Uh, what do you think will change schematically with Stanford with the new staff?
Yeah, they've brought in Bobby April from Wisconsin, and that's been something that they've been leaning on right now, because Wisconsin, despite a change, did have some success on defense, especially in the front seven. They bring in that whole staff, the D line, inside linebackers coach, and outside linebackers coach. Basically, they have a few other coaches elsewhere in the secondary, but it is a base that has been successful, and they hope that they can translate it to Stanford, this scheme at least. Personnel wise, they're definitely going to have some challenges. Basically, the whole secondary is new, guys that haven't played a whole lot, or you're at least losing the experienced starters at just about every position. At linebacker, inside linebacker, that was another one of those groups where a lot of highly touted recruits that were hurt a lot of their career, and then the last 2 years they got out there, it didn't produce very much. So, and then again, unproven players stepping in, but maybe they'll be more productive. The D line last year was very, very young. Did not have much experience. The defensive tackles, not much size, and that group has improved significantly. It's still going to be a weakness on the interior D line, I believe, but not as bad as it was last year. The one strength they can really look at is the edge position, where they're about 5 or 6 deep. Both youth and veteran players there. That's the one position they're pretty loaded at, and April himself has taken that group. So it'll be interesting to see if they spread some of those guys around, maybe move some to the interior, the bigger ones, and maybe try to get some of the more athletic guys at linebacker, or just rotate the heck out of those 6 players and lean on them more than anyone else.
It's interesting you say that, because I look at this and they lose Heron, they lost to Mooney, but they got what they have Bailey. Who are some of the guys that are standing out there at that edge spot? Like, this is why I love doing summer school, because like I would not have thought that edge would be a strength for Stanford this year. And is it Bailey and somebody else, or who's kind of emerging here?
Well, with Bailey and his class are 2 other second year guys that were very promising last season. RJ Cooper and Teverua Tafiti. Both of those guys would have been those big name freshman type players had they not been overshadowed by David Bailey. They got some of that action later in the year. There's some other pieces. There's a 4-star Wilfredo Abar, who basically missed all last season, and he was healthy in the spring, so now he's getting that shine. He's been in there. Aaron Armitage is another highly rated recruit that was 2 years in the program and in that mix, and might move. He's one of those guys I could probably see moving to free up some space elsewhere. But yeah, they've got. I mean, you look at the 2 deep and a lot of positions, you think, uh-oh, this is the first team. But on the edge, you look at the third team and say, hey, I mean, these guys, they've got some contributors there that are just a little bit buried at that particular spot.
I think I know at a lot of these positions. I agree. That is good to hear on edge. I want to hit you with this question about corner. So Jimmy Wyrick and Manley basically didn't play not much or at all last year, but they're still on the roster, and they were guys who played, you know, starters or significant backup reps in 2021. Have those guys bounced back, or are you expecting them to be starters for this team?
Yeah, I mean, Manley was not even on the roster last year. He came back, and all of a sudden, he's taking first team reps. I think it says more about the status of the roster probably than them themselves. There's not a lot of options, but they're about as good of options as they have. I mean, to have some upperclassmen who do have some experience, it's better than nothing as far as what the coaches are inheriting. But yeah, there's only about enough players for a 2 deep out there in the secondary over the course of spring. And you've got some upperclassmen like them, and you've got some unproven underclassmen that are trying to battle for those spots. So they're in a tough spot there at the secondary.
Stanford does return maybe the best kicker in the country, and they kicked a lot of field goals last year when they got in range. 13 of 13 on stuff of 40 plus, and also he was perfect on the year. So that's 18 of 18 is pretty darn good. Let me ask you this: where is the position other than quarterback uh, where the drop off between the starters and the backups is the largest? That spot where you go out to practice, you're like, all right, man. Hmm. If they lose him and this backup's got to play, they're in real trouble.
Yeah, that one is tough because it feels like a lot of the first team and second teamers are both, they're unproven and they've been competing all spring. So it feels like a lot of them are kind of interchangeable. I think maybe inside linebacker is one spot where they have gone to the portal now and fixed some of that, but they lost a lot of inside backers. They bring back Tristan Sinclair, and the other starter in spring was a walk-on, Spencer Jorgensen, who got a scholarship after spring. But they have added 2 inside backers there from the portal, Gathan Bernadelle from FIU, and now they just brought in another inside backer from Wisconsin from the old staff. So that might not be as big of an issue, but that's definitely one where a lot of the depth is not necessarily kind of promising developing players, but it's more walk-ons and guys that have kind of not been around as long as some of the other position units.
Makes sense to me. Jackson, really appreciate the time. All Cardinal fans need to check out Cardinal 247, and maybe in for a rough year this year, but Troy Taylor is a consistent winner. I know I had him much higher than where CBS had him in the coaching ranking. I did not put him dead last or anywhere close to it. The guy knows how to coach, and um, I guess we'll just see how well the school plays ball in terms of transfer restrictions and things like that, because it's a difficult retooling, if they don't want to call it rebuild, I guess, given the restrictions.
Yeah, I mean they've gotten into the portal a little bit. They're not going to have 85 scholarship guys this year. I think they're going to be about 5 short at least. But they bring in Justin Lamson at quarterback, and maybe he changes things for them. Maybe the offense looks better with Taylor's offense. You hope within 2 or 3 years that this thing will be back on track. But this year's going to be a tough one, I think.